Good morning YouTubers, this is the Irish Scrapper back with my second tutorial. I hope you enjoyed my first tutorial, but if you didn't get an opportunity to see it, you can click the link on the top right hand side of the screen and it'll bring you back to my first tutorial ever. Today we're going to be working with stamps. We're going to create our own scene and then use some stamps to bring it all together. So here you can see an example of the type of work I'm hoping to recreate. This is one I did earlier. It's a fun technique. Some of you may have seen it before and some of you may not, but it's one of my favourite techniques because it makes you feel as if you're getting involved in the art and design of the card. So basically what we need is a card blank, and this measures 10 inches by 7 inches. And then we score it at 5 inches and fold it over, and that'll make our card. The next thing we're going to need is a piece of black cardstock, and this measures 6 3/4 inches by 4 3/4 inches, and this will be used to mat and layer. It'll be put on top of the red card. And finally we need a piece of white cardstock which measures 6 1/2 inches by 4 1/2 inches, and this piece of cardstock we're going to use for doing our scene and our stamping. So what we need to do first is we need to bring in the big shot, because we're going to use a die to cut out a 1 1/2 inch circle. So what we do is we place the die face up on tab 1 of the big shot. We're going to need a post-it note, and the principle here is that we need to keep some of the adhesive on the circle. So line it up carefully and the adhesive should be just on the score of the die cut. We'll put the two plates on the big shot and wind it through like so. Now we can remove the excess post-it note. This die cut is made by Provo Craft, and the circles come in a various range of sizes, and they're very handy die cuts to have. Now when I remove the die cut, there is still adhesive on the circle. Place this circle anywhere you'd like to see either a sun or a moon. I'm choosing to put it in the top right hand corner for this purpose. I'm going to come in with some distress ink, and the colour I'm using here is Broken China. So I'm loading up my applicator with some of the ink. I'm starting off my card on the mat, and then in circular motions you bring the ink over your circular piece, blending, trying not to move your circle, and blending as best you can. Don't worry at this stage, because anything that doesn't look too great will blend in the end. It'll all come together. It's a very forgiving technique. So when you've put enough of the Broken China on, what I'm going to do is to come in with a warm colour. I'm going to use Wild Honey. This will just give a bit of colour and lightness to the skyline. So again, I'm loading up the applicator, rubbing a lot of it off onto the mat, and then gradually bringing it across the cardstock and the circle, and blending it away onto the other side of the card. Now we can remove the circle punch, and what I'll do here is go back in with some more Broken China to try and bring the sky together. It's a nice relaxed technique insofar as, you know, you're creating your own piece of artwork. So already you can see it's starting to come together. Now I want to create some background. So all I've done is I've torn a piece of cardstock, as you can see. And I'm going to use this piece of cardstock to create my background. So I'm placing it down on the card, and I'm taking some old paper distress ink, loading up my applicator, and as before, starting off the card, coming in circular movements. You don't have to lean too heavy here because we're just looking for a subtle outline. So just blend as best you can, and when you remove it, you'll begin to see the outline of some of the mountain ranges we're going to put into this card. Now I'm changing from old paper to walnut stain, which is a deeper brown colour. I'm removing the broken china applicator and putting on the one for walnut stain. So again, I put down my piece of paper but offset it so that it's not, you know, directly on top of the first mountain range we did. It's the same technique as before, circular movements across the paper. When you're doing this, you may be thinking, oh my goodness, this doesn't look right at all, but believe me, it does all come together. So now you can see that the walnut stain gives a much more definite outline to the mountain range. And finally, I'm going to put in one more set of mountains, and I'm going to go back to the old paper again for a subtle effect. Now at this stage you can see that there's a bit of a depth of field with the mountain ranges, and the different colours have given it a nice effect. Now I'm introducing the broken china again to create the foreground. Blending all the time with circular motions or circular movements. Now I've decided I'd like to put a little bit more depth of colour into the sky, so I've gone back and reapplied the broken china. Now as you can see, there's white in between the mountains. I'm going to go in there with the broken china, and this will give a subtle effect as if there's water between the mountain ranges. So basically that's our card base made. So from here, what I like to do is to frame the card base, and it kind of brings it all together and gives more depth to the card. So for this I have a couple of different stamps I'm going to use. This one I like, it's a leafy stamp, and I'm applying it to an acrylic block. This will hold the stamp in place, and what I like to use are different shades of green to create my my frame. So I'm starting off with crushed olive, which is a light shade of green, and I'm inking up the leaf stamp well. However, I don't go in and stamp it down in a straight line. What I like to do is to offset the stamp on the paper so that it's half stamped on the paper and half off onto the mat, like so. Apply firm pressure, and as you can see here, you know, it gives a nice effect. So work away with your stamps, just randomly stamping at different levels. And as you can see here, there was a little piece that didn't stamp too well, but not to worry. All you do is re-ink your stamp and go back in and fill in the gap. So it's only a matter of inking and stamping to create the framed effect at the top part of your piece of work. And there's another technique called second generation stamping, where you don't re-ink the stamp, but you go back in, apply pressure, and it'll give you a lighter shade of stamping. And this helps to create depth in your card. Now I'm going to change this stamp, and I'm going to pick up another stamp which is a longer stamp, and it'll need a bigger acrylic block. It's always good to use the correct size acrylic block because it gives you more movability, or maneuverability even. Now I'm going to change from the crushed olive, and I'm going to use forest moss. I'm going to use forest moss. So stamping up, it's kind of a feathery stamp I'm using here. So ink up your stamp well. And here again, I'm not going to just press the whole stamp down onto the piece of paper. I'm going to set it off slightly, stamping onto the paper and the mat. And that gives a nice feathery effect. And once again, what you're trying to create is a frame. So here I'm just using the top part of the stamp. I'm inking it up again, and I'm going to use the full length of the stamp here. No, I'm not. I'm using a little bit of the stamp again, but I do go back in and use the full length of the stamp on the right hand side of the card. Here. Now I'm going to do a second generation stamp to create the effect of depth. So now you can see it's all starting to come together. All I have left to do now is to finish framing the card with stamps along the bottom. So once again, I'm using different stamps and using the acrylic block to suit the size of the stamp. Now I'm going to use pine needles, which is a more vivid coloured green. And I'll let you watch as I create the bottom frame for the scene. While you're watching, I'm taking time to have my cup of tea, as it is morning. Now I'm changing to an even smaller stamp here. It's a little kind of a leaf stamp, and I'm going back into one of the lighter colour greens. And it's just a matter of building up your texture and your layers. What I'm wanting to achieve here is to keep the stamping in the middle of the lower part of the card low, so that I can put my focal point in behind it. And mixing and matching the different shades of green gives a fairly realistic kind of sense to the scene. Now we've finished framing the scene, and what we're going to do next is concentrate on the main focus of the card. And the main focus of the card is going to be the horse and carriage. It's a lovely stamp. So here I'm applying it to the acrylic block, and what I'm going to stamp the horse and carriage in is archival black ink. Archival ink always gives a very crisp image. Make sure that you stamp your image up very well, because you only get one chance and one opportunity to put the stamp down, and you really don't want to mess up after creating your wonderful background. So line up the stamp where you want it to go and press firmly. Now I'm rocking slightly backwards and forwards, in making sure that I don't move the actual stamp itself, and then I lift it straight up, and there's a nice crisp image of the horses and carriage. Now the way we create the reflection is, we don't want it to be a crisp, sharp image like the main image. We want a kind of a more watery type of reflection. So I'm changing from the archival ink, and I'm going to use the distress ink again. I'm going to use black soot. You need a piece of transparency. This is an old piece that I've cut from a doll's box, the window that was in the doll's box. You can use acetate or any kind of transparency that you find around the house. Now I want to see what I'm stamping, so I've decided I'll put the red card blank behind my acetate. Now once again, when you're inking up your stamp, make sure you get good coverage, because even though we want the image to be watery, the distress ink will help with that, but we don't want to be missing the horses or the carriage. So take time to ink your stamp up well. Now line up your stamp, and once again press firmly down onto the acetate. I am rocking again slightly forwards and backwards, but I am ensuring not to move the stamp itself. As you can see, it is a more watery looking image. It's not as sharp as the one that was stamped with the archival ink. Now how we get our reflection is, we turn our acetate upside down and take care to line it up. Try and get the wheels of the carriage under the wheels of the stamped image, and the same with the horse's legs. Line it up as best you can, and then firmly rub over the image with your finger. You need to rub over quite a few times to make sure that you're transferring all the ink onto the cardstock, like this. And when you remove the acetate, the ink should stay behind, and now we have our reflection. However, our horse and carriage does look as if it's floating a bit, so we want to ground it. And the way I like to ground it is to take some ink and a paintbrush, a small paintbrush, and I'm using the black no, not the archival ink, sorry, but the distress ink, the black soot distress ink. I load the top of my paintbrush with a little bit of the ink, and then what I do is I carefully run a line under the wheels of the carriage and the legs of the horses, and this grounds the horse and carriage. Then with the little bit of ink that's left, I just kind of pull it down and it makes like a ripple. I haven't reloaded the brush, I'm just using whatever's left on the brush to create a little bit of a ripple underneath the horse and carriage. So now that's grounded. Now basically that's our scene. You could leave it at that, but what I like to do is I like to put a further frame around the piece. I think it just brings it all together. And for this purpose I'm going to use a darker blue. It's sapphire blue, I believe, but all the names of the inks will come up on the screen. And again, I take an applicator and load up the applicator with the sapphire blue, and starting off the card again, just drag the applicator to the bare edge of the cardstock, and this slightly darkens it. I think this gives a lovely finish to a piece of work. And now the last side. It's truly wonderful to see it all coming together. There's great satisfaction in making this type of card. So that's it, that's our scene, and literally all we have to do now is to put the card together. So I'm taking the black piece of cardstock, and I'm going to put my adhesive onto the back of our piece of work, making sure to get the edges. What I'm using here is Pritt Stick. I find that sufficient to hold card on card. Take time to line your piece of work up carefully, and making sure that you have the same amount of black cardstock showing on all edges. Pritt Stick is very forgiving, so if you didn't get it down exactly right, it gives you a little bit of time to play about and, you know, get it into the right place. Now, to adhere this to the main card, I use the Pritt Stick as well. Just make sure to get your edges, because we don't want anything poking out, or poking up rather. I put a little bit more Pritt Stick on to this layer because it's a double layer, and once again ensuring that I take time to line it up correctly and make sure that I have the same amount of red edge on all four sides of the piece of work. And that's it, ladies. That's our lovely card made. This card can be used for any occasion at all. It can be used for birthdays, anniversaries. I kind of made it an autumnal looking card here, but you can adapt it if you choose different colours. You know, if you want to, you can put little birds or butterflies flying across the sun or the moon, whatever you want to call it. So there you go. I hope you enjoyed making this card.